The buzzing atmosphere of the college campus on move-in day was overwhelming for Bryan. As an introvert by nature, he found the crowded scene to be equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. He maneuvered his way through the swarm of students and their families, trying his best to maintain his composure. His focus was on finding his dorm room when his gaze inadvertently strayed towards the university's football field. A group of athletes, their muscles glistening with sweat, were engaged in an impromptu game. Among them, one figure stood out. Ethan, the star quarterback, was a sight to behold. His golden skin glowed under the sun, his hair a disheveled mess of curls, and his athletic attire left little of his chiseled physique to the imagination. Bryan had seen Ethan around campus. His pictures had been splashed all over the university's social media, his football victories the talk of the town. He was the golden boy of the university, loved and admired by all. But Bryan had never really paid much attention to him, at least not until now. Up close, Ethan was not just physically impressive, but also had an aura of affability that was hard to ignore. His vibrant laugh echoed across the field, and his interactions with his teammates were filled with genuine camaraderie and respect. As Bryan stood there watching, he found himself drawn to Ethan's energy. His heart pounded in his chest, and he felt a strange fluttering in his stomach. It wasn't just his looks that captivated Bryan, but also his charisma, his kindness, his humility. For the first time in his life, Bryan felt a pull toward someone that he couldn't easily dismiss. Shaking himself out of his reverie, Bryan tore his gaze away from the field. He had a lot to do. Unpacking, settling in, preparing for his first day of classes. But as he walked away, he couldn't help stealing one last glance at Ethan, his mind filled with curiosity and an unspoken longing. That night, as he lay on his small dormitory bed, the image of Ethan's smiling face replayed in his mind. He didn't understand his sudden fascination with the jock, but he couldn't deny its existence. Little did he know then, his life was about to take an unexpected turn, and that the charming football player would become an integral part of it. Weeks slipped by in a flurry of lectures, assignments, and social events. Bryan found himself settling into the rhythm of college life. He joined a few clubs, made a small group of friends, and quickly became known for his academic prowess. As fate would have it, he shared a class with Ethan. The jock, who was much more than just a jock, was majoring in sports psychology. Their paths crossed often. Their conversations grew from polite nods to shared jokes and thoughtful discussions. Ethan's intelligence surprised Bryan. He defied the stereotype of the dumb jock, often providing insightful inputs during class discussions. One afternoon, their professor assigned them to the same group for a semester-long project. Bryan was wary at first, unsure about working closely with the object of his secret admiration. But Ethan, with his easygoing nature and strong work ethic, made it easy. Outside of class, Bryan got to know Ethan better. They hung out in the campus coffee shop, worked on assignments together, and Bryan even attended a few football games to cheer Ethan on. He was drawn to Ethan's vivacity, his infectious laughter, his enthusiasm for life. His initial admiration for Ethan deepened into a genuine fondness. He cherished their budding friendship, even as he wrestled with the emotions that seemed to grow stronger each day. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy Bryan's company as well. He often sought Bryan out, even outside their project work, and their friendship solidified. He was intrigued by Bryan's intellect, his wit, his ability to see the world from unique perspectives. He found himself opening up to Bryan about his hopes, fears, and dreams, something he had never done before with anyone. Their bond grew stronger with each shared laughter, each late-night study session, each heart-to-heart conversation. It was an unexpected friendship, one that neither of them had anticipated. Yet it felt right. It felt comfortable. And while Bryan hid his growing feelings behind the mask of friendship, he couldn't help but hope for something more. Little did he know, Ethan was experiencing a turmoil of his own. Yet he kept his feelings to himself, tucking them away like a secret too precious to share. He was convinced that Ethan, the admired jock who was often seen with beautiful girls, was unquestionably straight. He witnessed Ethan's casual flirtations, heard him talk about his dates, and each time a pang of disappointment would clutch at his heart. Bryan's longing was a constant undercurrent in their interactions. Each shared smile, each touch, each moment of understanding felt bittersweet. His feelings were a source of both joy and pain. Joy at the depth of his emotions, pain at the seeming impossibility of his love being reciprocated. Ethan, oblivious to Bryan's inner turmoil, continued to be a constant presence in his life. His laughter, his kindness, his companionship were both a balm to Bryan's aching heart and a reminder of what he couldn't have. In his quieter moments, Bryan often found himself gazing at Ethan, his eyes tracing the familiar contours of his face, his mind filled with unspoken words of love. But he kept his feelings hidden behind a mask of friendship, fearful of what the truth might do to their bond. His nights were often sleepless, his mind replaying their shared moments, his heart yearning for something more. He grappled with his feelings, torn between his desire and the fear of losing Ethan's friendship. It was a silent struggle, one he bore alone, his heart filled with a longing that seemed destined to remain unfulfilled. Unbeknownst to him, a change was on the horizon. His silent prayers for reciprocation were about to be answered in the most unexpected way. One chilly night, when the campus was bathed in the soft glow of the moon, a knock sounded on Bryan's dorm door. He opened it to find Ethan standing there, his face etched with an expression Bryan had never seen before. There was a vulnerability in his eyes, a rawness that instantly alarmed Bryan. Without a word, Ethan walked in and sat on Bryan's bed, his eyes distant, his shoulders hunched. Bryan sat next to him, his heart pounding, an unknown worry gnawing at his insides. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan broke the silence. "I've been questioning things," he began, his voice low and shaky. "About myself, my feelings." His confession hung in the air, heavy and filled with implications. Bryan held his breath, his mind racing, not daring to anticipate what Ethan might say next. I think I might be attracted to a guy," Ethan finally blurted out, his eyes meeting Bryan's. His confession was like a bombshell, leaving Bryan stunned and speechless. He had never imagined hearing such words from Ethan. He was shocked, but he pushed aside his surprise and focused on his friend. Bryan reached out, his hand resting on Ethan's arm, a gesture of silent support. "It's okay, Ethan," Bryan assured him, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "It's okay to question, to not have all the answers. You're figuring things out, and that's completely normal." Ethan nodded, a look of relief crossing his face. They spent the rest of the night talking, Ethan pouring out his fears, his doubts, his confusion. Bryan listened, offering words of comfort and understanding, his own emotions tucked away in the corner of his heart. As Ethan laid his vulnerabilities bare, Bryan saw the struggle in his eyes, a mirror of his own internal battle. His heart ached for Ethan, and he couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. Yet he quelled it quickly, reminding himself that Ethan needed his support, not the weight of his unspoken feelings. So Bryan set aside his own emotions, focusing on being there for Ethan, providing him with a comforting presence and a listening ear. As he watched Ethan leave his dorm room that night, a sense of anticipation lodged itself in his heart. Bryan didn't know what this revelation meant for their friendship or for his concealed feelings, but he could sense that the dynamics between them were about to shift, promising to bring about changes that Bryan could only dream of. Several days passed since Ethan's confession, days filled with tension and anticipation. Bryan found himself constantly thinking about Ethan, wondering how he was handling his self-discovery, yearning to be there for him. One evening, a soft knock on Bryan's door announced Ethan's arrival. He stood there, looking more vulnerable than Bryan had ever seen him. His eyes held an emotion that Bryan had dared to hope for, but never really expected to see. "Ethan," Bryan questioned, his heart pounding in his chest. "I need to tell you something," Ethan began, his voice barely above a whisper. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His eyes were locked onto Bryan's, reflecting a mix of fear, determination, and something else Bryan couldn't quite decipher. "It's you, Bryan," he said, the words dropping into the room like a stone into still water. "The guy I've been attracted to. It's you." Bryan's breath hitched in his throat, his mind went blank, his heart pounded so fiercely that it drowned out his thoughts. Ethan had feelings for him? The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Ethan, seeing Bryan's hesitation, stepped closer. His eyes were pleading, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what this means for us, Bryan, but I can't ignore how I feel about you." In that moment, time seemed to slow down. Bryan looked into Ethan's eyes, seeing the sincerity, the raw emotion, the longing. He felt a surge of warmth, of hope, of love. "I feel the same, Ethan," Bryan finally confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. His admission hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken desires. Ethan's eyes widened in surprise, then shimmered with relief and something more potent, desire. He reached out, gently cupping Bryan's face, his thumb tracing the line of his jaw. Bryan leaned into the touch, his eyes closing, his heart thundering. Their faces were inches apart now, their breaths mingling, their hearts beating in a wild rhythm. Ethan closed the gap, pressing his lips against Bryan's in a tender yet passionate kiss. Bryan responded instantly, his arms winding around Ethan's neck, pulling him closer. The kiss was a revelation, a culmination of their hidden desires. It was as if all their pent-up emotions were pouring out, their hearts speaking a language only they understood. They pulled apart after what felt like an eternity, their foreheads resting against each other, their breaths labored. As they stood there, holding each other close, the world outside ceased to exist. Their hearts were unveiled, their feelings laid bare, their love finally finding its expression. It was a moment of profound realization, of acceptance, of the promise of a love they had both yearned for. Their journey was only just beginning, but they knew they would traverse it together. In the weeks that followed, Bryan and Ethan navigated the uncharted territory of their new relationship. Their friendship seamlessly evolved into romance, their bond deepening with each shared moment, each stolen kiss, each whispered confession of love. Bryan marveled at the change in their relationship. Being with Ethan felt right, like a missing piece of his life falling into place. He treasured the moments of intimacy they shared, the look in Ethan's eyes when he said he loved him, the warmth of his touch, the sound of his laughter. Ethan, too, found in Bryan a love he had never anticipated, but now couldn't imagine being without. His initial confusion gave way to acceptance and joy. Bryan was his rock, his safe haven, the person who understood him better than anyone else. Their relationship wasn't without its challenges. Coming out to their friends, dealing with the surprise and occasional prejudice, required courage and resilience. But they faced it all together, their love serving as their shield against the world. Ethan continued to be the star quarterback, and Bryan, the academically brilliant student. But now they were more than that. They were partners, lovers, each other's strength. They attended games together, studied together, shared dreams and fears, their lives intricately intertwined. The college campus, which had once been a backdrop to their separate lives, now bore witness to their love story. They were the jock and the academic, two opposites who had found love in the most unexpected way. They had started as strangers, became friends, and now they were lovers. Their love story a testament to the power of acceptance, understanding, and the courage to follow one's heart. As they stood hand in hand one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of orange and purple, Bryan looked at Ethan, his heart brimming with love. Ethan turned to him, a soft smile playing on his lips, his eyes reflecting the warmth of their shared affection. "I love you, Bryan," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet clear in the quiet evening. "I love you too, Ethan," Bryan replied, his words honest and heartfelt. They stood there, basking in their love, knowing they had a lifetime of shared moments ahead of them. Their journey had just begun, their love story still being written. But they were ready to face whatever came their way, as long as they had each other. With that, they shared a kiss under the setting sun, a promise of their undying love.